family class and spousal sponsorship to Canada. Anyone who's a Canadian citizen or permanent resident can sponsor an eligible family member to live in Canada as a permanent resident. As a permanent resident, they can live in Canada indefinitely, work, go to school, and receive other benefits such as healthcare. Family members who can be sponsored include spouse, husband or wife, same-sex spouse, husband or wife, common law partner, conjugal partner or fiancé, in a romantic relationship with the sponsor but is unable to live with them due to circumstances outside their control, such as sexual orientation or legal barriers. Dependent child, spouse or common law partner's dependent child. Grandchild, who is still a dependent. Sponsor your spouse to Canada. Since October 25, 2012, sponsored spouses and partners who have been together 2 years or less must live together in a legitimate relationship in Canada with their sponsor for a minimum of 2 years after their permanent residence application is approved. If the relationship is not maintained for 2 years, the sponsored person may lose their permanent resident status. This is done to minimize permanent residence obtained through fraud and protect sponsors from being taken advantage of. The process to bring your loved one to Canada has 2 parts. The first part is for the Canadian citizen or permanent resident to apply to become a sponsor. Currently, spouses or partners can be sponsored from inside Canada while they're on a visitor visa, called inland sponsorship, or while they're outside Canada, called overseas sponsorship. Common law sponsorship to Canada. A common law partner is a person who has lived together with the sponsor in a conjugal relationship for at least 1 year. In a common law marriage, there is no document to prove that the couple is living together. A common law marriage exists from the day a couple decides to physically live together. To qualify under the family class, Canadian immigration law requires a couple to prove that they have lived together continuously for at least 1 year. Documents that may prove the existence of a common law relationship include joint bank accounts, joint credit cards, proof of property purchased in both names, invoices in both names, lease agreement showing both names, correspondence, bill sent to either party at the same address, insurance policies showing the other partner as beneficiary. Same-sex sponsorship to Canada. Same-sex marriage, marriage between 2 men or 2 women, has been legal in Canada since 2005. Shortly after this time, Canada began recognizing sponsorship applications between people of the same sex in a genuine romantic relationship. Same-sex couples who want to undertake a sponsorship application must follow the same regulations and meet the exact same requirements as heterosexual couples, including the financial obligations and criminal background checks. Spousal sponsorship costs. Government fees. In addition to the legal fees paid to a consultant or lawyer to assist you with this process, the applicant must also pay a fee to the Canadian government for filing their application. Please see the fees below. Processing fees. Sponsor. Amount per person, 75 Canadian dollars. Principal applicant. Amount per person, 475 Canadian dollars. Principal applicant under 22 years of age, and a dependent child of the sponsor, a child to be adopted, or an orphaned family member that is neither married nor in a common law relationship. Amount per person, 75 Canadian dollars. A family member 22 years or older who is married, engaged, or in a common law relationship, regardless of age. Amount per person, 550 Canadian dollars. Family member who is under 22 years and who is not married, engaged, or in a common law relationship. Amount per person, 150 Canadian dollars. Right of permanent residence fee, principal applicant, spouse or common law partner. Amount per person, $490 Canadian dollars. Government application fees are subject to change at any time without notice and are not refundable from IRCC, regardless of whether the application is approved. Sponsorship to Canada requirements. The sponsor. To become a sponsor, you have to meet the following requirements. Be at least 18 years old. Be a Canadian citizen or permanent resident. Live in Canada or be able to prove that you will live in Canada when the sponsorship application is approved. Prove that you can meet the basic financial needs of the person that you're sponsoring and their dependent children. You cannot sponsor someone if any of these situations apply to you. You have sponsored a previous spouse or partner within the last 3 years. You receive social assistance other than disability. You are in bankruptcy protection. You have defaulted on any immigration-related financial obligations. You have been convicted of a certain sexual and/or violent crimes. You were sponsored as a spouse or partner fewer than 5 years ago. You are in jail or prison. You are under a removal order to leave Canada. When you've sponsored someone to live in Canada, you are financially responsible for their well-being for between 3 and 10 years, depending on their relationship to you and their circumstances. This means that if a person you have sponsored or their dependents receive social welfare benefits during this time, you are obligated to pay this money back to the province of their residence. Responsibilities of the sponsor. When you sponsor a spouse, partner, or other family member, you commit to looking after them while they settle in Canada. As part of the application, you will be completing and signing multiple forms that pledge you to take care of your spouse. These are the 2 forms and what they commit you to. Sponsorship undertaking. This is a legal pledge signed by the sponsor to the ICCRC, where you swear to provide for your sponsored spouse and any dependent children they are bringing with them. You pledge to supply them with the following: food, clothing, utilities, personal requirements, shelter, fuel, household supplies, healthcare not provided by public healthcare services, such as eye and dental care. Note: in Ontario, there is a 3-month waiting period from the date of arrival of the sponsored spouse before they're eligible for Ontario Health Insurance Plan, so you must look after any healthcare needs that they have in the initial 3-month period after landing. Sponsorship agreement. This is a legal agreement between you, the sponsor, and your spouse, and covering any dependent children. It involves the following legal commitments. You agree to provide the basic necessities for your sponsored spouse and any dependent children, covered in the undertaking. See above. You agree to this so the government has assurance that your spouse will not go on social assistance. Your spouse agrees to seek financial assistance from you if they're unable to provide for their own basic needs before going to the government to apply for social assistance. You both agree that the period of undertaking for spousal sponsorship is 3 years from the date that the sponsored spouse receives their permanent residence in land, or from the day your sponsored spouse lands in Canada as a permanent resident, outland. If you are committing to care for a dependent child as well, then you, the sponsor, are responsible for the child for a period of 10 years or until they're 25 years old, whichever is longer. Requirements to be sponsored to Canada. To be sponsored by a Canadian citizen or permanent resident to live in Canada, you will have to follow certain procedures, including undergo a medical examination. If you're being sponsored as a spouse or partner, you must be at least 16 years old. Obtain fingerprints to pass criminal and security background checks. Obtain a passport, and in certain countries, an exit visa. Attend an interview at the Canadian Visa Office if required. Sponsorship to Canada requirements. The sponsor. To become a sponsor, you have to meet the following requirements. Be at least 18 years old. Be a Canadian citizen or permanent resident. Live in Canada, or be able to prove that you will live in Canada when the sponsorship application is approved. Prove that you can meet the basic financial needs of the person that you're sponsoring and their dependent children. You cannot sponsor someone if any of these situations apply to you. You have sponsored a previous spouse or partner within the last 3 years. You receive social assistance other than disability. You are in bankruptcy protection. You have defaulted on any immigration-related financial obligations. You have been convicted of a certain sexual and/or violent crimes. You were sponsored as a spouse or partner fewer than 5 years ago. You are in jail or prison. You are under a removal order to leave Canada. When you've sponsored someone to live in Canada, you are financially responsible for their well-being for between 3 and 10 years, depending on their relationship to you and their circumstances. This means that if a person you have sponsored or their dependents receive social welfare benefits during this time, you are obligated to pay this money back to the province of their residence. Sponsorship of other family members to Canada. Sponsorship of parents and grandparents is still on hiatus. However, they may be eligible to apply for a visitor visa or super visa to stay in Canada for up to 2 years at a time. Documents that prove relationships of the sponsor to a parent. Sponsor's birth certificate. Documents that prove relationship of the sponsors to a grandparent. Sponsor's birth certificate. Sponsor's parent's birth certificate, through whom the sponsor is related to the sponsored grandparent. Possible reasons for sponsorship refusal. IRCC can refuse a sponsorship application for many reasons. Here are some of the most common ones. The relationship is not genuine. For example, if IRCC believes that the relationship exists only for the sponsored person to immigrate to Canada, the application will be refused. The sponsor does not meet financial requirements. The necessary supporting documents have not been included in the application. The person you wish to sponsor does not qualify through the family class. The person being sponsored did not meet the medical requirements. The person being sponsored is inadmissible to Canada due to criminal convictions. In this case, the person may be able to obtain a temporary resident permit, TRP, and still be sponsored to live in Canada. Please refer to our TRP page and contact us for more information at 1-866-760-2623. How to organize a sponsorship application. Sponsorship applications are gigantic, so it's important that you organize your application in a way that IRCC will understand. For this example of how to organize a sponsorship application, we're going to take the most common example, sponsoring a foreign spouse. You'll want to include as much information as possible in as organized way as possible. Some people break up their application into separate folders within the same envelope or box. It's up to you how seriously you take that part, but you will need to show the officer how to proceed through the stack of paper you've provided. A cover letter, table of contents, sponsor's application forms and supporting documentation, sponsored spouse application forms and supporting documentation, proofs of your relationship. Cover letter. In the cover letter, explain that you're applying for either inland or outland sponsorship and give the vital details, names, dates of birth, citizenships, locations, etc., of both the sponsor and the spouse or partner to be sponsored. You should also indicate what your relationship status is: married, engaged, common law, conjugal. Table of contents. You can also include your table of contents in your cover letter or attach it as a separate piece of paper, as long as it's prominent. You have 2 choices here. 1.
Make a general table of contents that outlines all 3 sets of documents you'll be providing, and then create individual table of contents for the other parts. Or 2. Itemize every single form and document you've included in your package in this table of contents. Which you choose is up to you. There is no right way, but the table of contents should match how you've organized your package. If it doesn't, then there was no point in creating a table of contents in the first place. Make sure to include page numbers. Make sure to include the document checklist, either the IMM 5491 for outland applications, or the IMM 5443 if it's an inland application. Let's assume this is an outland application, i.e., the spouse or partner is still overseas. Sponsors' application forms and documents. If you choose to have individual tables of contents for each section, you should make the sponsor's table of contents the very first page. 1. Table of contents. See above. 2. IMM 1344. Application to sponsor, sponsorship agreement and undertaking. Fully completed. 3. IMM 5481. Sponsorship evaluation. Fully completed. 4. IMM 5540. Sponsor questionnaire. Fully completed. Sponsored spouses' application forms and documents. If you choose to have individual tables of contents for each section, you should make the sponsored spouses table of contents the very first page. 1. Table of contents. See above. 2. IMM 0008. Generic application form for Canada. Fully completed, with the validation page at the front. 3. IMM 000 DEP. Additional Dependents Declaration. Fully completed. 4. IMM 5669 Schedule A. Background Declaration. X number of adults being sponsored. For example, if there are no adult children being sponsored, you would complete one form. Fully completed. 5. IMM 5406. Additional Family Information Form. X number of adults being sponsored. Fully completed. 6. IMM 5490. Sponsored Spouse Partner Questionnaire. Fully completed. 7. Additional forms required for citizens, residents of the country that their sponsored spouse is from. 8. Any documentation specifically related to questions in the above forms. 9. Document checklist for your country. Proof of your relationship. If you have chosen to have individual tables of contents, you should make that the first page, or attach it to the pack of photos. 1. Table of contents. See above. 2. Photos in a package, for example, sorted by date and event. 3. Communication records, sorted by type of communication, then by date. Include a cover sheet if you think it would help, explaining what each record is and why you have provided it, and why you haven't proved something if that's the case. 4. Anything else you think will prove your relationship, and you should both organize this appropriately and explain why you have included the information, either here or in your cover letter. Always err on the side of more rather than less evidence. If you're not sure whether or not to add something to your package, include it. Additional tips. Do not staple anything. Paperclip or otherwise clip forms and sections together, and then clip those together with larger clips, or put them in separate named folders or envelopes. You do not want anything to frustrate the officer. Don't bind your package either. If you want, include tabs so the officer can easily flip through your package. If you're not sending the original of something, explain why. Photocopy everything you submit. You need a record of what you've submitted to the government. Good luck!